Hi, I'm Steve Adubato from MetroFocus. A new report by the New York Attorney General's office shows that 74% of all guns involved in crimes that are recovered by law enforcement come from out of state, and 9 out of 10 handguns recovered come from out of state. All this with New York State having some of the toughest gun laws in the nation. With us now is the Attorney General of New York State, Eric Schneiderman, to make sense of all this. Attorney General, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Describe the problem of gun trafficking. And by the way, the report is actually called Target on Trafficking. Right.
Target on Trafficking is a report we just issued. It tells us several very important things. First of all, New York's gun laws work. In New York City, 92% of the handguns, which are really the weapons of choice for gangs and violent criminals, recovered by law enforcement, come from out of state. So the bad guys are not even trying to get their guns here because our gun permitting laws actually do work. We also know that most of the guns used in crimes in New York State come from a very small number of states. 86% total statewide of all the handguns used in crime come from 7 states, the traditional iron pipeline states headed south to Florida, and then out in western New York, you have to add in Ohio, because some of the guns that show up in Buffalo, Niagara, places like that, come from Ohio. So it proves that tough gun laws work. If every state had a mandatory background check at gun shows, as we do, because we closed the gun show loophole here. My office worked with the gun show operators to do that. If every state required a permit, we would have an end to this gun trafficking, which is pushing guns into the hands of criminals up the iron pipeline every day.
So it's called the iron pipeline. Why?
That's a term that was coined because we know the guns are coming up I-95 from Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. Those are really the states that predominate guns going into New York City. Out in western New York, it's a little different. You have to add in Ohio. But New York City and the suburbs, I was out in Suffolk County with a young police officer, Mark Collins, who'd been shot twice by a felon with a gun that came from Virginia. We add in this report other information, such as whether the perpetrator caught with the gun is the same as the original purchaser. And we found that in only 6% of the cases is the perp the same person that bought the gun in Pennsylvania or Virginia or North Carolina. That's a good indication the gun was trafficked. If a different person buys the gun, it crosses a state line, and then you add in time to crime, it shows up within a year or 2 years. Those are guns that look like they've been trafficked. And now for the first time, New York law enforcement is going to be able to use this data to target, we think, a relatively small number of gun stores in these states that sell a lot of guns that show up in New York crime scenes, and individuals who purchase a lot of guns in these states that show up at New York crime scenes.
So, Attorney General, as I'm listening to you, by the way, this report is very important, and people watching in the tri-state area who want to get access to this groundbreaking report, how can they do it?
They can go to our website, ag.ny.gov/guns, and just look for Target on Trafficking. Easy to find, and it's an interactive tool.
What does that mean?
It means that you can pick your county. Say you live in Buffalo and you want to look at what the gun movement in and out of Erie County. You can pick your county and find out what portion of the guns come from where. And at a more granular level, we're going to be able to work with our colleagues in law enforcement to target the specific stores and dealers that are responsible for this. But it really does also lead to some very clear policy recommendations that should be followed at both the federal and state level.
Each state can have the toughest gun laws possible, but that does not guarantee what will or will not happen in your state as it relates to handguns, because we are so vulnerable to the movement of guns from state to state. Does that mean there has to be federal laws across the board that every state has to live by?
Well, it could be done in one of two ways. I mean, obviously, the best solution is for there to be the federal government should close the gun show loophole in New York.
Clarify for that.
The 40% of all the guns sold in the United States do not get a background check at the time of sale. 40% of the sales. So we can end a large part of that by enforcing a law, that rules that we have in New York and that I negotiated in cooperation with New York's gun show operators, that you have to get a background check before you can get out of a New York gun show with a gun you didn't bring in. We have a system of tags. This is unique in the country.
Right.
My name goes on it, the guns I bring in go on it. You can't get out of a New York gun show with a gun you didn't bring in without showing a background check. The gun show operators in New York favor background checks.
Who fights it?
The truth of the matter is the rank and file of the NRA all support background checks. They don't want criminals or people with mental health problems to get guns. This has just been caught up in the gridlock in Washington, and it's really the dysfunctionality of Congress that is the biggest problem. But the federal government could even if Congress won't act, provide incentives for states that set up databases like ours. DOJ does that all the time. The Department of Justice provides incentives for local law enforcement to do things like purchase bulletproof vests for police officers. You could provide incentives. Actually, as a matter of Homeland Security, you should provide an incentive to guarantee background checks before guns are sold. We also really should have permits required in every state. Permits for handguns. It's clear that it works. Now, it's also important to know that it is having a beneficial effect in that the number of guns recovered in New York is actually lower than in a lot of states with more lax gun laws. So there is some suppression of gun crime that is attributable to our effective gun laws. But you are also right that to the extent there are guns being used in crime, they're coming up from out of state, and that's something that we do need help, either from other states amending their laws or ideally from the federal government taking action.
Attorney General, to what extent do you, in having conversations with attorneys general in other states who are involved in this iron pipeline, to what extent are you involved in conversations with your colleagues in those states and they get this issue that their laws or lack of laws are impacting negatively, adversely, the citizens of New York State?
Well, they do get it. I have talked to some of my colleagues because it also is impacting their citizens. If there's a gun store illegally selling guns to someone who's clearly a straw purchaser, someone who's trying to buy guns and
get them
to criminals, they're probably selling them in that state as well as in New York. It's not like these guys are necessarily specialists. Or if there's a gun store that has bad procedures, and we think the overwhelming majority of the federally licensed gun stores follow proper procedures. We think that they're pretty scrupulous about it. We think what the data is going to show us is a relatively small number of bad actors, and it's a problem really for everywhere. If they're selling guns to folks who shouldn't have them in North Carolina, and some of those guns are coming to New York, they're probably selling them to people who are using the guns in North Carolina as well. So I do think there's going to be popular movement. The biggest challenge is at the congressional level. Do you know there's not even a federal law that criminalizes gun trafficking?
There is no law.
No. There are laws that have been used to go after gun traffickers, but our own Senator, Kirsten Gillibrand, sponsored a bill that did not pass last time around that would criminalize every step of gun trafficking. They should pass that law next session.
Finally, Attorney General, tell everyone the name of the report one more time.
The report is Target on Trafficking, and it's available at ag.ny.gov/guns.
Thank you, Attorney General Eric Schneiderman. Thank you so much.
Thank you.